"No one touch him." The senior handler said it like a warning and a surrender at the same time. The German Shepherd had been sitting in the center of the triage bay for 40 minutes, and nobody had gotten within 6 feet of him without bleeding for it. 3 trained handlers, 2 military veterinarians, 1 sedation attempt that ended with a syringe on the floor and a corpsman holding his wrist. They were out of options. Then a rookie walked in. 22 years old, dark hair loose past her shoulders, no rank visible. And the dog looked at her and stood up. Drop your city in the comments right now. Subscribe, hit like, turn the bell on. Because what she said next, nobody in that room was cleared to hear. The triage bay at Forward Operating Base Halcyon had seen worse nights than this one. Everyone working it knew that and said so, quietly, to themselves. In the particular way military medical staff remind themselves that whatever is happening right now is not the worst thing that has ever happened here. It was a coping mechanism. Tonight, it was not working especially well. The German Shepherd had been brought in at 19:20, 2 hours, by a 2-man handler team from the base K9 unit, both of whom had sustained minor lacerations during the transport, and neither of whom was willing to discuss the details on record. The dog's name, according to the tag on his worn harness, was Cole. His file, according to the base K9 registry, listed him as active, 6 years old, tan and black coat, trained for explosive detection and close quarters support work. His assigned handler, according to that same file, was Staff Sergeant Ray Colton. Colton was currently in the surgical bay, 2 buildings over, with a traumatic leg injury sustained during a vehicle ambush on Route 7, and had been unconscious since extraction. Cole knew. That was the thing nobody in the triage bay wanted to say out loud, but everyone understood. He knew. Colton was gone, in the way working dogs know things before anyone tells them. Through the absence of a specific scent, through the silence where a specific voice should have been, through 48 hours of operational deployment, in which every signal his training had taught him to trust had been replaced by strangers with the wrong hands and the wrong cadence, and none of the words that meant anything. He was not feral. That was the first thing Senior Handler Davis had said when he briefed the veterinary team, and he had said it with the emphasis of a man who needed the distinction to be understood before anyone did anything they could not take back. Cole was not feral. He was not broken. He was not dangerous in the way dangerous dogs are dangerous. He was dangerous in the way a locked door is dangerous to someone who does not have the key and decides to force it anyway. 3 people had already made that decision tonight. 3 people had the marks to show for it. Dr. Leanne Holt stood at the far edge of the bay, with her arms crossed and her gloves already on, and her expression doing the work of someone managing frustration that has nowhere productive to go. She was the senior military veterinarian on base, and she had handled difficult animals in difficult circumstances for 11 years. And she had, up until approximately 40 minutes ago, believed that patience and the correct sedation protocol could resolve any working dog situation she was likely to encounter. Cole was revising that belief in real time. "Options," she said, not a question. A demand directed at the 2 handlers still in the bay, both of whom had graduated from standing near Cole to standing near the wall, with the self-preserving instincts of people who have already given what they had to give. Handler First Class Marcus Webb spread his hands. "We've tried every standard approach. Voice commands in English, in German, the full compliance sequence from his file. He knows every command we've given him. He's choosing not to respond." He paused. "That's not a dog that doesn't understand us. That's a dog that has decided we're not the ones he's waiting for." "Then who is he waiting for?" Holt said. Webb looked at the floor. "Colton," he said. "And Colton can't come." The room absorbed that. Cole sat in the center of the bay, with his injured left foreleg extended slightly, not by accident, but by the same deliberate operational posture that had characterized everything he had done since the handlers brought him in. The injury was visible, a deep laceration along the outer foreleg from the same ambush that had put Colton in surgery, bleeding slowly but consistently in the way injuries bleed when they have been going long enough that the body has started adjusting around them. He needed treatment. He needed it in the next hour, or the blood loss would begin to compound other issues that would make treatment significantly more complicated. He knew people were trying to help him. Holt was certain of that. He was not responding to their help because help from the wrong source, in his trained psychology, did not register as help. It registered as interference. And he had been trained to treat interference in hostile environments with exactly the response he had been demonstrating for the last 40 minutes. "Get the sedation kit," Holt said. "Full load. We do this the hard way." "Last time we tried sedation, he put the syringe through the wall," Webb said. "Last time you telegraphed the approach," Holt said. "We do it differently this time." Webb looked at Cole. Cole looked at Webb. The look was not aggressive. It was informative. It said, in the language of an animal that has spent 6 years learning to communicate with the specific human who was not in this room, that it already knew what was being planned, and had already decided what it was going to do about it. Holt was reaching for the sedation tray when the bay door opened. The woman who came through it was not moving quickly. She was not moving with the urgency of someone responding to a situation. She was moving the way people move when they have just come off something else and have not yet fully arrived at the next thing. Dark brown hair loose past her shoulders, olive green sports top, military camouflage cargo pants, a smear of something that had dried on her right forearm that nobody in the room looked at too closely. She had no clipboard, no visible rank. Nothing about her announced what she was or why she was here, except that she was here, and she had come through a door that was supposed to be restricted access, which meant she had clearance somebody in this room did not know about. Cole's head came up, not in the threat assessment rotation that had been his primary mode of operation since he arrived. His head came up the way a head comes up when something familiar arrives in an unfamiliar place. His ears moved forward, both of them, together. The posture of a working dog encountering a signal it has been trained to recognize. The growling stopped. It had been a constant background current under everything in the bay for 40 minutes, low and deliberate and unbroken, the auditory equivalent of a locked door reminding everyone it was locked. And it stopped. In the time it took the woman to cross the threshold and let the door close behind her. Holt turned. She looked at the woman, then at Cole, then at the woman again. "Who are you?" she said. "Petty Officer Cale Nora." The woman's voice was even, not performing calm, just calm, the kind that comes from a place deeper than the current situation. "SEAL Team 7. I was across the base when I heard the call come over secondary comms. This bay is restricted to K-9 medical personnel and assigned handlers," Holt said. "I know," Nora said. She was not looking at Holt. She had not looked at Holt since she came through the door. Her eyes were on Cole, with the focused attention of someone reading a page they have read before in a different context and are trying to locate the specific line they need. "I came anyway." Webb straightened from his position near the wall. "Ma'am, with respect, 3 trained handlers have already attempted engagement. The dog is not responding to anyone in this room. I don't know what you think you can do that we haven't tried." Nora looked at Cole's harness, at the worn patch near the left chest plate. A German Shepherd silhouette, a horizontal bar, 2 small parallel lines beneath it. She looked at it for 4 full seconds. Something moved across her face that was not quite recognition, and not quite something else, and was exactly the thing that happened when a person found the answer to a question, They had not known they were asking. "What unit was his handler assigned to before the base rotation?" she said. Webb frowned. "Colton rotated in from Camp Weaver 8 months ago. Before that, his file shows a classified assignment. Designation, Shadow Trace. Most of it sealed." Cole made a sound, short and low. Not a growl. Something that was almost the shape of a word. Nora's jaw tightened once. "I know that unit," she said. "You know Shadow Trace?" Holt said. The edge in her voice was now the edge of someone whose professional certainty is encountering something it was not prepared for. "I trained under their Canine Protocol Division before I rotated to 7, Nora said. "For 14 months. She finally looked at Holt directly. "The dog is not being difficult. He is not in trauma response. He is running a specific trained behavior sequence that Shadow Trace canine units default to when their handler is compromised and no authorized secondary contact has been established." She looked back at Cole. "He is waiting. Not for Colton. Colton is gone, and he knows that. He is waiting for someone who knows the right sequence to tell him that the chain is still intact. That there is still someone at the other end of it." Nobody spoke for 3 full seconds. Then Davis, who had been silent since before Holt arrived, said from the doorway, "What sequence?" Nora looked at him. "Classified," she said. "Above this room's clearance level." She looked at the sedation tray Holt had been reaching for. "And if you use that before I've had a chance to try, you are going to trigger a physiological response in that dog that your dose calculation has not accounted for, because Shadow Trace canine conditioning includes a specific adversarial response to sedation approach in handler loss situations. And the data on what happens when you ignore that is in a file none of you have access to." She paused. "I do." Holt's hand was still on the tray. She looked at Cole. Cole was still looking at Nora, still standing with that forward ear posture that had not changed since the door opened, still not growling. "How long do you need?" Holt said. "However long it takes," Nora said. "But I need the room to stop moving first." Webb looked at Holt. Holt looked at Cole. Cole looked at Nora with those amber eyes that had been reading threats all night, and had just read something else entirely. Something that did not have a threat category. Something that his whole trained body was processing with the careful urgency of an animal that has been given one piece of information it has been waiting days to receive. Holt took her hand off the sedation tray. "Room stops moving," she said. "You've got your shot. Don't waste it." Nora set her hands at her sides, palms open, fingers loose. She took one step forward into the space that 3 trained handlers had already tried and failed to occupy, and Cole watched her come and did not move away. The room stopped moving. Not because Holt ordered it, because something in the air changed the moment Nora took that first step, and Cole did not retreat from it. And every person in that bay felt the shift and understood instinctively that what was happening in the next few minutes was more fragile than anything their training had prepared them to protect. Webb pressed his back against the wall. Davis, still in the doorway, went still as furniture. Holt lowered her hands to her sides and stood exactly where she was, and did the hardest thing a doctor in a crisis situation ever has to do. She waited. Without moving, without speaking, without the particular forward energy of medical authority that had been bouncing off Cole like sound off concrete for the last 40 minutes. Nora moved the way water moves. Not fast, not performing slowness either, just present and unhurried, her weight shifting forward with each step in a way that announced itself honestly. No hidden geometry, no approach angle that tried to come in under Cole's awareness. She was walking toward him the way you walk towards something you respect, which is to say, directly, without pretending you were doing anything other than what you were doing. Cole watched her come. His amber eyes tracked every movement with a trained precision that had not stopped running its cycles since he arrived. But the cycle was different now. Less threat filtration, more attention. The distinction was visible in the set of his ears and the angle of his shoulders, and the fact that his injured leg had not shifted into a defensive brace. She stopped 4 feet from him, crouched, both knees. Weight settled back on her heels so that her eye level dropped to his, and her body opened rather than closed. Nothing about her posture reading as dominance or submission. Just presence. The particular presence of someone who has been in this specific configuration before, in the dark, under conditions that made this triage bay look simple. Cole's nose worked twice, quick and precise, reading her the way working dogs read everything. Not with suspicion now, but with the focused attention of recognition trying to confirm itself. Nora held still and let him do it. "His leg," Holt said, very quietly from across the room. "The bleeding has been consistent for 70 minutes. We have a window, but it is not open indefinitely." "I know," Nora said. She did not look at Holt. Her eyes stayed on Cole. "Give me 3 more minutes before you say anything else." Holt closed her mouth. The room held. Cole took 1 step forward. Just 1. His injured leg moved with it, and the movement cost him something visible. A hitch in his breathing. A fractional tightening around his eyes that was the only acknowledgement he was going to make of the pain. He stopped, 1 step closer to Nora than he had been willing to be to anyone all night. Webb exhaled audibly from the wall. Davis's hand, which had been resting on the doorframe, dropped to his side. Nora did not react to Cole's step. She did not lean toward him, did not reach, did not make the mistake of treating his movement as an invitation to rush the distance remaining between them. She just stayed where she was and breathed at a normal rate, and let the step be what it was. His choice, his timing, his pace. "You know, Colton," she said. Not a question. Said in the tone of a statement that is also a door being opened. Cole made the sound again. The one that was not a growl and not a bark. The sound that had no clinical term and that everyone in the room had been hearing without knowing how to categorize it. Short and low, and shaped like something that a human throat would have made into a word. "I know," Nora said. "I know." Her right hand moved, slowly, from her side, palm turning upward, fingers loosely open. She did not extend it toward Cole. She rested it on her own knee, palm up, available, not demanding. The gesture of someone leaving a door open, rather than walking through it. Cole looked at the hand, then at her face, then at the hand again. And then Davis made a mistake. He had been still for 4 minutes, which for Davis was approximately 3 minutes and 45 seconds longer than his natural patience allowed. He shifted his weight, just slightly, just a small adjustment of his feet on the floor. But in the particular silence the room had been holding, it landed like something dropped. Cole's head snapped toward him. His shoulders dropped. His weight came forward onto 3 legs, and the 4th, the injured one, lifted slightly off the ground, in the automatic threat response that had put 3 people against the wall earlier tonight. "Don't move," Nora said. Her voice was sharp and immediate and carried the specific authority of someone who was given a command in live situations and had people's lives depend on whether it was obeyed. Davis froze. Literally froze, mid-breath, 1 foot still slightly displaced from where it had been. Cole's eyes stayed on Davis for 3 full seconds. Then slowly, they came back to Nora. She had not moved. Her hand was still on her knee. Her body was still at his eye level. She was still there exactly as she had been, unchanged by the interruption. Reliable in the way a fixed point is reliable, when everything else is in motion. Cole's weight settled back. His injured leg came back to the floor. The threat posture released by degrees, each one slower than the last, until he was standing the way he had been standing before Davis moved. "Thank you," Nora said to Davis, flat and completely without sarcasm. Just acknowledgement that he had done the right thing when it counted. Davis did not speak. He appeared to be considering whether breathing qualified as movement and erring on the side of caution. Holt was watching Cole with the expression of a veterinarian watching an animal do something that is not in any of the literature she has read, and updating her literature in real time. She had been in this profession for 11 years. She had worked with military dogs in trauma response situations, with animals who had lost handlers, with canine units coming back from deployments that had changed them in ways that took months to unwind. She had never seen a dog in this level of defensive lockdown release that posture for a stranger. Not in 4 minutes. Not in 40. Not without sedation or exhaustion forcing the issue. Whatever Nora was to Cole, it was not nothing. And it was not simply her training. Something else was operating here, and Holt was beginning to understand that she was not going to find it in a protocol manual. "Tell me about Shadow Trace," Holt said, quietly, not interrupting, just filling the edge of the silence carefully. Nora did not look away from Cole. "Classified Deep Reconnaissance Unit. Disbanded 2 years ago. Their canine program ran parallel to standard SEAL canine operations, but with a completely separate conditioning architecture." She paused. "Their dogs were trained for zero communication environments. No verbal commands in the field. No audio signals. Everything ran through physical contact sequencing and a code system that was built specifically for the unit." "And when a handler was lost," Holt said, "the dog defaults to a waiting behavior. Not passive waiting, active waiting. He maintains his last operational posture, keeps his threat assessment running, refuses contact from unauthorized personnel, and holds until either the handler returns or someone with the right code sequence establishes secondary contact." She watched Cole's ear rotate once toward the sound of her voice, and then settle back to forward. "The code tells him the chain is not broken, that there is still a valid authority at the other end of his training." Webb pushed off the wall slightly. "You said you were in the protocol division. Does that mean you know the code?" Nora was quiet for a moment. "Voss," Holt said, and then caught herself. "Nora, does that mean you know the code?" Cole took another step forward. Not prompted, not called. His own decision, his own pace, carrying that injured leg with the careful economy of a working animal that has been managing pain without showing it for long enough that the management has become its own kind of effort. He was 2 feet from her now. His nose came forward and touched her forearm, the one with the dried blood on it. He held the contact for 2 full seconds, reading, confirming, running whatever internal verification process his 6 years of highly specialized training had built into him for exactly this situation. Then he sat, clean and precise, the way Shadow Trace dogs sat, with the particular discipline of an animal that has been trained to communicate compliance through posture rather than sound. One message, without ambiguity. I am ready to be handled. By you. The room released a breath it had been holding for 5 minutes. Davis made a sound that might have been a word and decided against it. Webb's hand came up and covered his mouth briefly, in the gesture of a person containing a reaction they have not been given permission to have. Holt took one careful step forward. Cole's ear rotated toward her. He did not move away. He did not change his posture. He simply tracked her movement and assigned to the category that was different from the category every other movement in this room had received for the last hour. "He's going to let me examine the leg," Holt said. It came out quieter than she intended, almost to herself. "Yes," Nora said, "but go slow. And don't reach over his head. Come in under his eye level, and let him see your hands before you touch him." Holt looked at her. "You're going to tell me how to examine my own patient?" "I'm going to tell you how to examine a shadow trace canine in a handler loss situation," Nora said. "Those are not the same thing." Holt considered that for exactly 1 second. Then she crouched and approached the way Nora described, hands visible, under Cole's eye level, slow, and announced. Cole watched her come, watched her hands, let her touch the edge of the injury. He did not growl. He did not move. His amber eyes stayed on Nora's face with the focused patience of an animal that has made a decision and is holding it. "The laceration is deeper than the surface presentation suggested," Holt said, her voice going clinical and steady as her hands moved carefully along the wound edges. "He needs sutures, interior and surface. This is going to require local anesthetic at minimum, and possibly sedation for the deeper work." She looked up at Nora. "Will he tolerate local anesthetic if I administer it?" "Depends," Nora said. "On what?" "On whether you use the code first." Webb came off the wall entirely now. "You keep saying the code. Are you actually going to use it, or are you going to keep talking about it?" Nora looked at him, not unkindly, with the specific patience of someone who understands that impatience in this situation is the enemy of the outcome everyone wants. "The code is not something you use before the trust is established," she said. "The code confirms the trust. If I say it before he believes I'm the right person, it reads as a threat. Someone using a credential they shouldn't have." She looked back at Cole. "He has to believe me first. The code is the last step, not the first one." Webb absorbed that. His expression moved through several versions of itself and landed on something that looked like genuine understanding, arriving where frustration had been living a minute earlier. "So everything you've been doing for the last 10 minutes is the first step," Nora said. "Yes." Cole shifted slightly. His weight moved, not a threat posture, the adjustment of an animal resettling into a sustained position. His injured leg moved with it, and the hitch came again, that fractional tightening around his eyes, the only window into what the injury was actually costing him. Nora watched it happen. Her jaw tightened once. "He's been managing this pain on his own since before the extraction," she said. "Shadow trace dogs are trained to suppress pain presentation in the field. It's a liability in medical situations because they present better than they are." She looked at Holt. "His actual pain level is significantly higher than what you're seeing." Holt's hands stilled on the wound. She processed that. "How do you know?" "Because Colton would have known," Nora said. "And I know what Colton knew." The room went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Not the held breath quiet of people waiting for something to go wrong. The specific quiet of people who have just received a piece of information that has rearranged the room around it. Davis spoke for the first time in 6 minutes. His voice came out careful, like a man stepping onto ice and testing each foot placement. "How well did you know Colton?" Nora looked at Cole. Cole looked back at her with those amber eyes that had been running their trained assessment all night and had arrived, through some process that no protocol document had ever fully captured, at a conclusion about this specific person that it had not arrived at for anyone else. "Well enough," she said, and the room understood, without her saying anything more, that the answer was the kind of answer that contained everything, and explained everything, and still left the most important parts unsaid. Because the most important parts lived in the sealed file, and in the trained muscle memory of a German shepherd who had just sat down in front of a stranger and waited to be told that everything he had been holding together alone for 2 days was finally allowed to rest. Cole pressed his shoulder forward, 1 inch, into the empty air between them. The specific forward lean of an animal that is not requesting contact, but is declaring readiness for it. Nora put her hand on his neck, flat, still. The contact of someone who knows exactly what the gesture means to the animal receiving it, and means it back with the full weight of everything she has not said yet, and is not going to say in this room with these people watching. Cole exhaled, long and slow and complete. And the 40-minute standoff that had put 3 people against the wall and a sedation syringe on the floor ended not with a code or a command or a protocol being executed, but with a hand on the back of a dog's neck, saying the only thing that it ever actually needed saying. I am here. I am not leaving. You are not alone. Holt worked with the careful efficiency of someone who has been given a second chance at a procedure and does not intend to waste it. Her hands moved along the wound edges with the measured precision of 11 years doing this in conditions ranging from controlled to chaotic, and tonight sat somewhere between the two. Cole held still under her examination, the way he held still for everything since Nora's hands settled on his neck. Not passive, actively still. The deliberate, controlled stillness of a working animal that has made a choice and is honoring it. Interior laceration is significant, Holt said, her voice going into the clinical register she used when she needed to process and communicate at the same time. The surface presentation was masking the depth. He's going to need layered closure. Interior sutures first, surface second. Local anesthetic for the surface work, but the interior is going to require something stronger. She looked up at Nora. Which brings us back to the conversation we haven't finished. The sedation question, Nora said. The sedation question, Holt confirmed. I need him still for the interior work. Genuinely still, not disciplined still. There is a difference when I'm working 3 centimeters from a major vessel. Nora kept her hand on Cole's neck. The contact had not broken since she placed it there. Not because Cole required it every second, but because she understood that in this specific situation, for this specific animal, the continuity of contact was itself the communication. Every second it remained said the same thing. Still here. Still here. Still here. Before I answer that, Nora said, I need you to tell me what you're planning to use. Holt named the drug and the dosage. Nora was quiet for a moment. Cole's ear rotated once toward her silence, reading it the way he read everything, as information. Half that dose, Nora said. Shadow trace dogs metabolize sedatives differently. Their conditioning includes a suppression response to standard dosing that can cause the drug to compound in the system rather than clear cleanly. Half dose, slow administration, and I stay in contact through the entire process. She looked at Holt directly. If you use the standard dose and he goes under hard, getting him back is going to be harder than what you've already been through tonight. Holt stared at her. That information is not in any veterinary literature I have access to. It's in a file at Access Level 5, Nora said. I know because I helped write the medical section. Webb, from his position near the wall where he had been standing, with the increasingly uncomfortable stillness of a man who came in as the senior authority in the room, and has been watching that status quietly reassign itself for the last 20 minutes, said, Exactly how much of Shadow Trace's program did you have a hand in? Nora glanced at him. Enough. That's not an answer. It's the one you're cleared for, she said, not dismissively, just accurately. Davis made a sound near the doorway that might have been a laugh under different circumstances. Webb's expression did something complicated and settled into the particular resignation of a professional who has decided to stop pushing and start learning. Holt looked at the wound, then at Cole, then at her tray. She moved the standard dose syringe to the side and reached for the secondary kit, drawing half the dosage with the focused deliberateness of a doctor adjusting a treatment plan she did not arrive at herself and is choosing to trust anyway. I need you to stay in contact through the full administration and through the initial sedation response, she said to Nora. If his vitals change in a way I don't expect, I need you to tell me what I'm seeing before I try to correct it. Agreed, Nora said. And I need you to use the code before I administer. The room registered that, not loudly, the small collective shift of people who have been waiting for that word to arrive and are now watching the moment it does. Nora looked at Cole. His amber eyes were on her face, steady and present, and carrying the particular quality of attention that had been there since she walked through the door. The quality of recognition, of something that has been waiting a long time for the right frequency and has found it and is holding on to it with everything it has. She leaned forward slightly, not toward Holt, not toward the room, toward Cole. And she spoke, 6 syllables, low and precise, below the ambient level of the room, clipped at the edges, the way radio communication is clipped, the way things are said when every syllable has to carry weight, and none can be wasted. Not English, not standard K9 command language. The classified sequence that existed in one program's documentation and in the trained muscle memory of the dogs that program had built, and in the minds of the very small number of people who had been trusted to build it. Cole's entire body changed, not dramatically, not in the way bodies change in films, in the way real things change when the thing they have been braced against is finally removed. The last of the operational tension moved out of him from his shoulders to his hindquarters to his legs, and what was left was not weakness, but the specific quality of an animal that has been carrying a full operational load alone for 2 days and has just been told it can set it down. His eyes closed halfway, his breathing deepened, his head pressed into Nora's hand. Holt watched it happen and did not speak for 4 full seconds. Then she said, very quietly, "Administer." She gave the sedative slowly, the half-dose, the careful administration Nora had specified. Cole felt the needle and did not react to it. His eyes drifted further closed. His breathing stayed even. No compounding response, no hard drop, just a slow and gradual softening into the sedation that looked nothing like the crash that a full standard dose would have produced. "He's going under clean," Holt said, watching his vitals. Breathing is steady, heart rate dropping, but not precipitously. She looked at Nora. "You were right about the dosage." Nora did not say anything to that. She kept her hand on Cole's neck as his weight shifted and settled and his body moved from the controlled stillness of a working dog choosing compliance to the genuine stillness of an animal fully at rest for the first time in 48 hours. The room exhaled. Davis came fully through the doorway for the first time since Nora arrived. He stood near the wall, with the expression of someone who has just witnessed something he will be describing to people for years and already knows they will not fully believe him. Webb sat down on the edge of the supply counter. Not casually, with the specific weight of a man whose legs have been running on adrenaline and have just been informed it is no longer required. Holt began the interior work. Her hands were steady. Cole was still under them. Nora stayed where she was, her hand on his neck, her contact unbroken through the first suture and the second and the third, through the careful layered work that closed the interior damage that had been bleeding quietly for 70 minutes, while every attempt to treat it had ended with people pressed against walls. Nobody spoke while Holt worked. The room understood by now what silence was worth. Then the bay door opened, and the energy it brought with it was different from every previous entry tonight. Not medical, not military in the standard way. A man in his late 40s in a base administrator's uniform came through it with the particular bearing of someone who has been briefed en route and is still processing the briefing. Colonel Victor Strand. He took in the room in one sweep, Holt working at Cole's leg, Cole sedated and still, Nora crouched with her hand on the dog's neck, Webb and Davis along the walls wearing the expressions of men who have been humbled by something and have not finished processing it. Strand's eyes found Nora and stayed there. "Petty Officer Nora," he said. "Sir, you accessed a restricted triage bay without authorization from this command." "Yes, sir." "You administered classified protocol information to base medical personnel above their clearance level." "I gave them the dosage information they needed to avoid killing the dog, sir. The classification of the source was not the priority at the time." Strand looked at Cole. At the even breathing, the steady vitals on Holt's monitor, the wounds being closed by hands that had been unable to get near him an hour ago. He looked at all of it for a long moment. "Shadow trace," he said, not loudly. The way someone says the name of something they were not expecting to encounter. "Yes, sir," Nora said. "Your file has a shadow trace notation. Support division." "Yes, sir." Strand was quiet. He walked to the monitor and looked at Cole's vitals with the focused attention of a man reviewing something important. "Colton's in surgery," he said. "Status is stable, but recovery is going to be long. He is not going to be operational for a minimum of 6 months." He paused. "Possibly longer." He looked at Nora. "Which creates a problem for the dog." Nora said nothing. "Shadow Trace K9 units cannot be reassigned through standard channels," Strand said. "The conditioning architecture is too specific. A standard handler rotation will not work with a dog trained under that program." He looked at Cole again. "Which means we have a highly trained operational K9 with no handler, a compromised recovery timeline for the existing handler, and a base veterinary team that could not get within 6 feet of him an hour ago." He turned back to Nora fully. "And one person who walked in off a secondary comms call and resolved all 3 of those problems in 40 minutes. Webb straightened slightly from the supply counter. Davis had gone very still, in the way people go still when they sense a conversation arriving at a destination. Holt looked up from the sutures. She did not stop working, but she was listening with the specific attention of someone who understands that what is being said in this room right now is going to determine what happens in this room for a long time after tonight. "I want to ask you something," Strand said to Nora. "And I want you to answer me honestly, not according to what you think the correct answer is, according to what is actually true." Nora looked at him. "Sir, when you came through that door tonight, was it the secondary comms call that brought you here?" The bay was very quiet. Cole's breathing was slow and even. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Holt's hands were still moving. 3rd suture, 4th. The work proceeding with the quiet competence of a doctor who has stopped being surprised by this night and started simply doing her job inside it. Nora was quiet for a moment that had weight and edges. Then she said, "I heard the call. I recognized the unit designation in the description. I knew what the behavior pattern meant. And I knew what would happen if someone used the wrong dose." She paused. "But I also knew Colton. We served in the same operational context for 14 months before I rotated to 7. Her eyes moved to Cole, to the tan and black coat, the amber eyes closed now in genuine rest. The German shepherd, whose whole trained life had been built in the same program and the same darkness that had also built the 14 months she was describing. He talked about this dog every time we had a conversation that wasn't classified. Her voice stayed level. It was costing her something to keep it that way, and the room could hear the cost without being able to see it. Cole was not a working animal to Colton. He was the reason the work was survivable. He said that. She stopped, started again. He said it more than once. The room was silent. Then Davis said, from near the doorway, "Does Colton know you're here?" Nora looked at her hand on Cole's neck. The contact that had not broken. The contact that the dog was still leaning into, even sedated, some trained part of him maintaining the signal, even in unconsciousness. Still saying, "This person, this frequency, this is the right one." "Not yet," she said, "but he will." Strand looked at her for a long moment. Whatever calculation he was running behind his expression, it arrived at its conclusion quietly and without announcement. He looked at Holt. "How much longer on the closure?" 20 minutes for the surface work, Holt said. "After that, he needs monitored rest. 4 hours minimum before I want him mobile." Strand nodded. He looked at Nora one more time. "Stay with him," he said, "through the recovery. I want him stable, and I want someone he trusts in this bay when he comes back up." He paused. "We will talk about the rest in the morning." He turned and walked out, and the door closed behind him, and the room was left with the quiet of a situation that has passed its crisis point and is settling into whatever comes after. Webb looked at Nora. He had the expression of a man who has been wrong about several important things in the last hour, and is choosing to do something useful with that rather than defensive. "For what it's worth," he said, "I've been a canine handler for 9 years. I have never seen anything like what happened in this room tonight." Nora looked at Cole. At the steady breathing, the even rise and fall, the German Shepherd finally and completely at rest in a room full of strangers, because one person had stayed in contact and said the right thing at the right time in the right sequence, and meant every syllable of it. "He did the hard part," she said. "He decided to trust me. I just gave him a reason to." Holt tied off the final interior suture and reached for the surface kit. Outside the bay, the base was running its normal overnight operations, indifferent to what had happened in this room. But inside it, the 4 people who had been here for the last hour knew that something had shifted in a way that would take time to fully understand and longer to fully explain. Cole's ear twitched once in his sleep. A small movement. The trained scan cycle running even in sedation, checking the frequency, confirming the contact, finding it exactly where it had been every time he checked. Still there. Still holding, not going anywhere. Holt finished the surface closure at 23:14. She tied the last suture, checked the tension, checked it again, and sat back on her heels with the exhale of a doctor who has completed a procedure she was not certain she was going to get to complete 2 hours ago. The wound was clean. The closure was solid. Cole's vitals were running exactly where she wanted them. Steady and improving, the half-dose sedation metabolizing cleanly the way Nora had said it would. "He's going to be sore when he comes up," Holt said. The interior work was more extensive than the surface suggested. He is going to want to use that leg before it's ready, and someone is going to have to make sure he doesn't. She looked at Nora. "That's someone being you, since, apparently, he has decided that the rest of us are decorative." Webb made the sound that was almost a laugh again. It landed more fully this time, the room having loosened enough over the last hour to allow it. Nora did not smile, but something in her expression acknowledged the observation. Her hand was still on Cole's neck. It had been there through the full surface closure, through every suture, through the dressing application and the fluid line setup and the monitor adjustment. The contact had not broken once. Cole's ear had twitched toward her twice during the procedure, the sedated equivalent of checking, the trained scan cycle running even in unconsciousness, and finding what it was looking for exactly where it had been every time it checked. Davis was making notes on his tablet near the doorway. He had been making notes for the last 40 minutes with the focused attention of someone who has decided that what he is witnessing needs to be documented carefully and completely, not for bureaucratic reasons, but because he understands that what he is watching is the kind of thing that does not repeat itself and should not be summarized from memory later. Webb had stopped leaning against the wall. He was sitting on the edge of the supply counter with his arms resting on his knees, and his expression carrying the particular quality of a man who has spent 9 years being confident about something, and has spent the last 90 minutes discovering that confidence was built on an incomplete foundation. "The morning debrief," he said. "Strand is going to want the full shadow trace context, the protocol documentation, the conditioning architecture, the code sequence. All of it." He looked at Nora. "Are you going to be able to give him that?"
"Some of it," she said. "The parts that are relevant to Cole's care and the reassignment process. The rest stays sealed."
"Will he accept that?"
"He will when he sees Cole's response to the code on the bay footage," she said. "A commanding officer who watches a dog that 3 trained handlers couldn't get near, accept treatment because of a 6-syllable sequence, is not going to spend a lot of energy arguing about classification levels." Webb nodded slowly. "The reassignment," he said. "How does that work for a shadow trace unit? What does the process actually require?" Nora was quiet for a moment, not evasive, working through an answer that had several layers and needed to come out in the right order. "Formally, it requires a behavioral compatibility assessment, a transition protocol review, and authorization from the Shadow Trace program director." She paused, the program director being the person who held that role when the unit was active. Davis looked up from his tablet. "The unit disbanded 2 years ago." "Yes. So who holds that role now?" Nora looked at Cole. The tan and black coat, the steady breathing, the amber eyes closed in the first genuine rest he had managed since Colton went down on Route 7. She looked at him for a long moment, with the expression of someone who has been carrying a piece of information and is deciding whether this is the right time to set it down. "I do," she said. The room took that in without speaking. Davis stopped writing. Webb's hands came off his knees, and he sat up straighter with the specific posture of someone whose understanding of a situation has just been restructured at the foundation level. "You're the program director," he said, "of a classified canine unit." "Former program director," she said, "of a disbanded classified canine unit." The role carried over administratively when the program closed, because someone needed to hold the authorization credentials for the remaining assets. She looked at Holt. "There are 4 Shadow Trace dogs still active in various assignments across 3 bases. Cole is one of them. Any medical or operational decision that affects their conditioning architecture requires sign-off from the program director." Her voice stayed even. "Which is why the dosage information I gave you tonight was technically within my authority to provide." Holt stared at her. "You're 22 years old." "I was 20 when the program closed," Nora said. "I had been in the protocol division for 14 months. "You became program director at 20 years old?" "There was not a long list of candidates," Nora said simply. "The program closed because most of the people who ran it did not come back from the last operational cycle." She said that last sentence with the flatness of someone who has had a long time to decide how to carry that fact and has arrived at the version that costs the least to say out loud. The administrative role stayed with whoever was left who understood the architecture well enough to hold it responsibly. The bay was very quiet. Cole's monitor beeped, steady and slow. The sound of an animal at genuine rest inside a room that had been trying to either help or sedate him for the last 2 hours, now finally just breathing. Then the door opened, and the person who came through it changed the air in the room the way certain arrivals always do. Not through rank or volume, but through the specific gravity of someone who is connected to everything that has already happened and is only now arriving at it. Lieutenant Commander Grace Osei, Base Medical Command.
She was in her late 40s, compact and direct, and she had the bearing of someone who has spent 20 years making decisions in rooms where the decisions mattered. She took one look at Cole, one look at Nora, one look at the vitals monitor running its quiet, improving line, and said, "Brief me." Holt briefed her. Clean and complete, 3 minutes. Everything from Cole's arrival to the current stable status. Osei listened without interrupting, which was itself a form of authority, the kind that did not need to insert itself to be felt. When Holt finished, Osei looked at Nora for a long moment. "Shadow Trace Program Director," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Strand called me on his way out. He gave me the outline." She looked at Cole. "He also told me that you were with Colton's unit during the operational period." "Yes, ma'am. For 14 months. Yes." Osei was quiet. She walked to the monitor and checked Cole's vitals with the practiced eye of a physician who has been reading these numbers for 2 decades. She checked the dressing, looked at Holt's closure work, checked the fluid line. All of it efficient and unhurried and thorough. Then she turned back to Nora. "Colton is out of surgery," she said. The room felt Nora received that information. Not loudly. The small internal shift of someone for whom a piece of news that has been sitting at an unknown weight has just been assigned a definite one. "He's stable," Osei continued. "The leg is going to require a long recovery. He is conscious as of 40 minutes ago. His first question was about the dog." She paused. "His second question was about you." Something moved across Nora's face that she did not try to control. It was brief and complete and entirely private in the way that the most real things are always private, even when they happen in front of other people. "What did you tell him?" she said. "I told him the dog was being treated," Osei said. "I told him you were here." Cole's ear twitched. In his sedated state, the trained cycle running its check, finding the contact, finding the frequency, settling. "His third question," Osei said, her voice dropping by 1 degree into something that was not quite softness but was adjacent to it, was whether the dog was going to be okay. Nora looked at Cole, at the steady breathing and the clean closure and the vitals running their quiet, improving line, at the German shepherd who had dragged himself across a road for 2 days with a wound that kept bleeding because his training told him to hold his last operational posture until a valid authority told him he could stand down, at the animal that had refused every hand in this room until one hand arrived that spoke the right language and meant it. "Yes," she said. "He's going to be okay." Osei nodded once. Then she looked at Webb and Davis. "You're both relieved from this bay for the night. Dr. Holt will manage the monitoring shift. I want written incident reports on my desk by 0600. She looked at Webb specifically. Full account, including the 3 failed engagement attempts before Nora arrived. Webb did not flinch from that. He met Osei's eyes and said, "Yes, ma'am," with the directness of a man who has decided that accountability is the only useful response to the evening he has just lived through. Davis tucked his tablet under his arm and moved toward the door. He stopped just before he reached it and turned back. He looked at Nora for a moment, with an expression that had moved entirely past the professional categories it had started the night in, and arrived at something more honest. "For what it's worth," he said, "I've been on this base for 6 years. I have seen a lot of things I could not explain." He glanced at Cole. "This is at the top of the list. He paused. That is meant as a compliment. He walked out. Webb followed. The door closed behind them. The bay was quieter now. Holt at the monitor. Osei reviewing the treatment notes. Nora on the floor beside Cole, with her hand on his neck, and the particular stillness of someone who has been running at full capacity for 2 hours and is only now allowing the adrenaline to begin its slow withdrawal. Osei sat down in the chair near the monitor. She did not make it ceremonial. She just sat. The way people sit when they have decided a conversation deserves to happen close to the ground, rather than from standing height. I need to ask you something, she said to Nora. And I need you to answer it honestly, rather than according to what you think the correct operational response is. Nora looked at her. Ma'am? When Strand spoke to you about the reassignment, when he told you we would talk about the rest in the morning, Osei held her gaze. Do you know what that conversation is going to be about? Nora was quiet. Cole's breathing was slow and even under her hand. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Outside the bay, the base ran its overnight operations in the indifferent way that institutions run, while the things that actually matter are happening inside rooms like this one. I know what he's going to ask, she said. And? Nora looked at Cole for a long moment. At the tan and black coat, the amber eyes closed in real rest. The German shepherd who had made a decision in this room tonight about who he trusted, and had made it with a complete and unconditional commitment that working animals make decisions when their training and their instinct arrive at the same answer simultaneously. He had not chosen her because she was the program director. He had not chosen her because of the code, though the code had confirmed what he already felt. He had chosen her the way all real choices are made, before the logic arrived to explain it, in the space where recognition lives, where the frequency of one person's presence matches something built into another person's bones before either of them knew the other existed. She had come through a door tonight because a secondary comms call described a behavior pattern she recognized. That was true. It was also not the whole truth. And in a room where Osei was asking direct questions, and Cole was sleeping against her knee, and Colton was 2 buildings away asking whether the dog was okay, the whole truth was the only version that made sense to offer. I knew Colton for 14 months, she said. The work we did in that program was the kind of work that either breaks people apart or builds something between them that does not have a standard category. She kept her eyes on Cole. When he rotated to this base, I did not follow him. I rotated to 7 because that was my assignment, and because keeping a clear operational boundary seemed like the right thing. She paused. I have been reconsidering that for 8 months. Osei looked at her steadily, not with judgment, with the specific attention of a senior officer who is listening for the information that is going to help her make a good decision in the morning. The reassignment conversation, Nora said. I will tell Strand yes. Not because it resolves the operational problem, though it does. Not because I am the only person with the protocol clearance to make the transition work, though I am. She looked at Osei directly. Because Cole chose me in this room tonight, and I am not going to tell a Shadow Trace K9 that the choice he made in the worst 2 days of his working life was wrong. Osei looked at Cole, at the hand still resting on his neck, at the ear that twitched once in his sleep and settled, at the whole quiet architecture of a trust that had been built in 40 minutes from the materials of 2 years of history and one specific kind of presence that could not be faked or manufactured or transferred to someone else by memo. No, Osei said softly. You are not going to do that. Cole's monitor beeped. Steady, slow, moving in exactly the direction it needed to move. And in the particular silence that followed, the bay held everything it had witnessed tonight, the standoff and the code and the closed distance and the choice, all of it settling into the walls and the floor and the air, the way significant things settle, quietly and permanently,
into the places where they happened. Cole came back up from the sedation at 0140. Not all at once. In layers, the way working dogs come back. Each trained system coming online in sequence. The threat assessment cycle first. Always first. The ears before the eyes. The nose before either. His breathing changed. His muscles shifted under Nora's hand. His ear rotated once, twice, running the check, and then his eyes opened and found her face, and the cycle completed and settled, because the frequency was exactly where it had been every time he checked. Still here. He did not try to stand. He did not scan the room with the locked threat assessment focus that had defined every second of his first 40 minutes in this bay. He lay still and looked at Nora with those amber eyes coming back to full clarity, and something in them that was different from anything the room had seen before tonight. Not the patience of an animal waiting for the right signal. Not the discipline of a working dog holding a trained posture. Something older and quieter than both. The specific quality of an animal that has come through the worst of something and arrived on the other side of it, and is looking at the person who was there for the crossing. "Hey," Nora said, quietly. Just that one word. Cole pressed his nose against her wrist. Brief and deliberate and complete. Holt watched from the monitor station. She had been watching the vitals come back online for the last 12 minutes, with the focused attention of a doctor who has stopped being surprised and has started simply being grateful for the outcome. "Vitals are clean," she said. "Heart rate is normalizing. He is going to feel the leg when he tries to use it. I want him weight-bearing on it by tomorrow afternoon, but not tonight." "He won't push it," Nora said. "You know that for certain?" "Shadow trace dogs don't fight their own recovery," Nora said. "They were trained to assess their own operational capacity honestly. Colton used to say it was the one way they were smarter than most of the humans he worked with." She paused. He was not wrong. Osei was still in the chair near the monitor. She had been there since the conversation that ended with her saying, "No, you are not going to do that." And the bay had settled around her into the quiet of a situation that has finished its acute phase and is now in the work of what comes after. She looked at Cole for a moment, then at Nora. "I spoke to the surgical team 30 minutes ago," she said. "Colton's recovery trajectory is positive. They are talking about 6 to 8 months before he returns to any operational capacity." Nora kept her hand on Cole's neck. "I know. That is a long transition period for a Shadow Trace K9. "It is," Nora said. "But Cole is not a standard Shadow Trace asset. His conditioning was more advanced than the other 4 remaining units. He can hold a handler transition for longer than the others without behavioral degradation." She looked at Osei. "As long as the secondary contact is established correctly and maintained consistently." "Which you have done," Osei said. "Which I have started," Nora corrected. "Established correctly is tonight. Maintained consistently is everything that comes after." Osei absorbed that distinction. The precision of it, the way it said, without saying, that Nora understood the full scope of what she had walked into when she came through that bay door at 19:22 hours. Not just the emergency in the room, but everything the emergency was attached to. "Strand's debrief is at 0700, Osei said. "He wants you there." "I know." "The reassignment authorization. Do you have the documentation you need to process it formally?" "The program director credentials are in my file," Nora said. "The authorization can be drafted tonight and signed in the morning. It will be the shortest formal review this base has ever processed, because there is nothing to review. Cole has already made the decision. I am just providing the paperwork that reflects it." Cole shifted slightly. His injured leg moved, and the shift cost him something visible. A fractional tightening around his eyes. The suppression response running the way it always ran.
Nora's hand pressed slightly firmer against his neck. The contact pressure that said, "I see it. I know. You do not have to pretend with me." His eyes came to hers and held. Holt stood up from the monitor station and stretched her shoulders and looked at the room with the expression of someone taking stock of where they are relative to where they started. 2 hours ago, she had been reaching for a sedation tray that would have killed the animal she was trying to save. She had been certain enough in that reach that she would not have questioned it. She was thinking about that now, thinking about the cost of certainty that has not been tested. "Nora," she said. Nora looked at her. "The dosage information, the half-dose protocol, and the metabolic response data." Holt chose her next words carefully. "Is that information available to Base Veterinary Command? Not the classified portions, just the medical specifications relevant to the 4 remaining Shadow Trace assets." Nora thought about it for a moment. Not because the answer was complicated, but because she was determining the correct format for it. "I can prepare a medical brief," she said. "Non-classified, specific to the physical response data, without the conditioning architecture. Enough for any veterinarian treating one of the 4 units to avoid the dosage error that almost ended this tonight." Holt nodded once. "I would like that." She paused. "I would also like to say that in 11 years of military veterinary work, I have not had an outcome reversed the way this one was reversed tonight. And I am aware of exactly how tonight ended versus how it was going to end before you walked through that door." She met Nora's eyes directly. "Thank you." Nora looked at Cole. "Thank him," she said. "He did the deciding." Cole's ear rotated toward the sound of his name. His amber eyes moved between the two of them with a calm assessment of an animal that has been in the room the whole time and has formed its own opinions about everything it has witnessed. The bay door opened. Strand came back through it with the particular quality of a man who has spent the last 2 hours in motion and has now arrived at the place where the motion was always pointing. He looked at Cole, awake and stable, and the set of his shoulders changed by 1 degree. Not relief exactly. The specific adjustment of a senior officer whose worst projected outcome has been definitively removed from the table. "He's up," Strand said. 40 minutes ago, Holt said. "Vitals are clean. Wound is closed. He is going to be tender on the leg for 72 hours, but there is no permanent damage." Strand looked at Nora. Cole looked at Strand. Cole's assessment was brief and complete. 3 seconds. The amber eyes running their check, assigning a category. Settling. The category was not threat. It was not handler. It was something in between. The category of a known quantity in an environment that had already been assessed as manageable. Cole returned his attention to Nora. Strand watched that happen. He had the expression of a man who has been briefed on something and is now watching the briefing made physical in front of him. "The morning debrief," he said. 0700. "I want Holt, I want the incident report from Webb and Davis, and I want you." He looked at Nora. "And I want the reassignment documentation ready to sign when we sit down." "It will be ready," Nora said. Strand looked at Cole one more time. Something moved across his face that his professional expression was doing its best to contain, and not entirely succeeding. He was not a sentimental man. He had been in command positions for 15 years and had developed the particular discipline of someone who has learned to process difficult things efficiently and move forward without the weight of them slowing him down. But even he was not entirely immune to what this bay had witnessed tonight, and the amber eyes of a German shepherd looking at a young woman with the absolute focused trust of an animal that has found the one fixed point in a world that went unstable 2 days ago, was not something that filtered cleanly through professional discipline without leaving a mark. "We will talk about the rest in the morning," he said. Then he walked out. The bay settled back into its quiet.
Holt made her notes. Osei reviewed the treatment record. Cole breathed evenly, with his head pressed into Nora's hand and his injured leg extended at the careful angle of an animal, managing its own recovery with the same operational discipline it applied to everything else. Then Osei looked at Nora and said, "He is going to want to see you." Nora did not ask who. "I know. The surgical team will allow a brief visit. He is conscious, and his vitals support it." Osei paused. "I can arrange it for tomorrow morning before the debrief. It might be easier to do it after the reassignment is signed." Nora thought about that. Then she looked at Cole, at the dog who had spent 2 days alone in the aftermath of losing the person his entire trained life was built around, who had held every stranger at bay in this room, not out of aggression, but out of the absolute faithfulness of an animal that would not transfer its trust to an unearned hand, who had pressed his nose against her wrist 40 minutes ago with the simple directness of a working animal, confirming a decision it had already made. "Cole should be there," she said. Osei looked at her. "He is not cleared for movement until tomorrow afternoon." "I know," Nora said. But Colton's first question was about the dog. Not about the leg, not about the surgery, about the dog. She looked at Osei. "And Cole has been holding on to something for 2 days that is going to take longer to heal than the leg. Some of that healing needs Colton to be part of it, even if it is just a voice through a door, even if it is just long enough for both of them to know the other one is still there." Osei was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Cole, at the way he was positioned against Nora's knee, at the steadiness of him, at the 2 days of survival and refusal and waiting that had brought him to this bay and this floor and this hand. She looked at all of that and made the kind of decision that does not come from protocol. "I will speak to the surgical team," she said. Holt looked up from her notes. She did not say anything. She just looked at Osei, and then at Nora, and then at Cole, and she nodded once. The nod of a doctor who has decided that the correct medical call and the correct human call are, in this particular situation, the same call. At 0300, in the corridor outside the surgical recovery room on the far side of the base, Cole walked on 3 legs, with his 4th held at the careful operational angle of an animal, managing a limitation without surrendering to it. Nora walked beside him, her hand at his shoulder in the contact that had not broken since she first placed it in the triage bay. And they moved through the corridor together, with the quiet synchrony of 2 people who have been through something significant in a short amount of time, and are still inside the weight of it. The door to the recovery room was closed. Through it, the sound of a monitoring system beeping its steady rhythm. Nora stopped. Cole stopped with her. His nose came up. He read the air through the closed door for a long moment with the focused precision of an animal running its most important identification check. His tail moved. Once. Low and certain. Not excited. Not performed. The specific movement of a working dog that has confirmed something it needed to confirm and is communicating the result with the economy of an animal that does not waste signals. From inside the room, on the other side of the door, a voice. Rough from surgery and exhaustion, and the particular rawness of someone who has been carrying a question for 2 days without an answer. One word. Cole. Cole pressed his nose against the door. His whole body leaned forward by an inch, the same forward lean he had made toward Nora's open hand in the triage bay. The declaration of an animal that has decided and is committing to the decision completely. Nora opened the door. She stood in the doorway and let Cole go in first, the way you step aside for something that belongs before you in a room. Cole crossed the threshold on his 3 working legs, steady and deliberate, and stopped beside the bed. Colton's hand came down from the mattress and found the top of Cole's head, and Cole pressed into it,
and held. Two beings who had been separated by the worst 2 days either of them had lived, and were now in the same room, breathing the same air, and confirming for each other the fact that they had both survived it. Nora stood in the doorway and watched, and did not move. Colton looked at her over Cole's head. He looked the way people look when they have been through surgery, and then 2 days of not knowing, and then the answer arriving in the middle of the night, in a form they had not planned for. His eyes did the thing that eyes do when they are too tired and too relieved for the face to manage the full processing alone. "You came," he said. "I came," she said. He looked at Cole, at the compression wrap on his leg, at the clean sutures visible at the dressing edge, at the amber eyes looking up at him with the absolute complete attention of a working dog that has never once in its trained life looked at anyone the way it looks at this specific person. He looked at all of that and understood without being told the full shape of what the night had held. "He let you," Colton said. "He decided," Nora said. "I just showed up." Colton's hand moved along Cole's neck. The contact pressure that was not a pet or a reassurance, but a language. The same language Nora had been using since she placed her hand in the triage bay. The language that Shadow Trace had built, and Colton had carried into the field, and Nora had designed the protocols for, and Cole had been waiting to receive for 2 days. "Thank you," Colton said. He was not saying it the way people say "thank you" for a transaction. He was saying it the way people say it when the word is the smallest possible container for what they are actually trying to hand someone. Nora looked at Cole, at the dog who had dragged himself across a road, who had held every stranger at bay in a room full of people trying to help him, who had pressed his nose against her wrist 40 minutes after coming out of sedation, with the complete unfussy directness of an animal that does not perform its decisions. At the German shepherd who had looked at her through a bay full of chaos and noise and the wrong voices, and chosen. Simply and permanently, and without any of the doubt that made the choosing difficult for the human beings in the room watching him do it. She had come through a door tonight because a comms call described a behavior pattern she recognized. That was the version she would give in the debrief at 0700. It was true. It was also the smallest true thing in a room full of larger ones. The larger ones were between the three of them, and they did not need a debrief. They did not need documentation or formal authorization or the morning's paperwork to give them shape. They already had shape. They had the shape of a dog pressing a nose against a closed door, and a tail moving once with certainty, and a hand coming off a surgical mattress and finding exactly what it was reaching for. And two people looking at each other across a recovery room in the middle of the night with the full weight of 14 months and 2 days and one very specific triage bay between them, understanding without saying that the distance they had kept for 8 months had just been permanently closed by a German shepherd who did not believe in unnecessary distance and had made his opinion on the matter impossible to ignore. Cole looked up at Colton, then at Nora, then at Colton again. His tail moved a second time. He had made his choice in a room full of strangers at the worst point of the worst 2 days of his working life. He had made it with his nose and his trained instincts and the part of him that existed below training, the part that knew what safety felt like, before anyone taught him the word for it. He had made it the only way real choices are ever made, completely, without reservation, with everything he had. And he had been right. He was always right about these things. That was what made him what he was. That was what had always made him what he was. Not the training, or the conditioning, or the 6 years of operational work in classified environments that most people in this building would never have clearance to know about. The thing that made Cole what he was simpler and older and more reliable than all of it. He knew who belonged beside him. He had always known. He would always know. And on the night that everything else was uncertain, that knowledge had been the one fixed point in the room, and he had held on to it with everything he had, and it had held. That was not luck. That was not chance. That was a working dog doing exactly what he was built to do, which was to find the right person and trust them completely, and never, under any circumstances, let go. If this story reached something real in you tonight, drop your city in the comments right now. Tell us whether you have ever been the only one in the room who understood what was actually happening. Tell us whether you have ever trusted something completely in a moment when nothing was guaranteed. We read every single one. Hit like, subscribe, turn the bell on, and share this with someone who knows what it means to hold on when everything says let go. Same time tomorrow. We will be here.